All right. That pizza, those 3 slices of cold pizza I ate right before this are like a number on my throat. All right. Oh, whatever. We'll figure it out. All right. You ready to do this?
Yeah, let's go.
Let's do it. What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I'm Jeremy. If you're new here, welcome to the show. I am super stoked to have you. Before we jump into the normal stuff, I want to give a shout out to Chris for leaving some awesome feedback for Beyond UX Design, Master Your Craft Beyond Pixels and Prototypes. Don't forget, if you get the book from beyonduxdesign.com/book, you can use the code LISTENER to get 10% off your copy. Then leave some honest feedback. You'll get a chance to win a shout out on the show just like this. So head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/book. Use the code LISTENER to get 10% off your copy today. This week's episode is brought to you by Mento Design Academy, where it's not just about learning UX design, it's about discovering your unique path in it. And their approach is different, it's personal, it's tailored to you. They don't just teach, they inspire students to use their passions as a driving force in their learning. And that's something that I've experienced firsthand as a mentor. I've been fortunate enough to guide students who are exploring concepts that they're truly passionate about. It's not just about following a curriculum, it's about shaping that curriculum around what excites each student. And this approach emphasizes not just knowledge, but a deep love for the discipline and seeing my mentees grow, apply their passions, and craft portfolios that are genuinely them. It's been one of the most rewarding experiences of my career, to be honest. So if you're looking for a UX course that's as unique as you are, check out Mento Design Academy. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/Mento. And just for my listeners, use the promo code BeyondUX200 to get $200 off the course. So join Mento and let your passions lead your learning journey. And if you haven't done it already, please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. If you are regular here and you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. That'll help me out so much more than you can imagine. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, and Jason for their support. And if you want to join these fine folks and many others and help keep the show independent and ad-free, you'll get rough transcripts and exclusive access to the entire video library of episodes, including episodes before they're released. And you can get instant access to the video archives for as little as $5 a month. And for more information on how you can support the show and help more people find out about what we're doing here, make sure to check out beyonduxdesign.com/support. And of course, if you think the shows are sharing, then I would love it if you told some friends. So I am really excited about today's episode because I've got a very special guest, an anonymous guest, someone that I'm not supposed to talk about who she is because she wants to keep her identity hidden. But that's cool because we're still going to learn all kinds of awesome insights specifically about working at big tech. Now, as somebody who has spent most of their career on the enterprise side working for big corporations and stuff, I had a chance to have a chat with Miryam. Did I say that right? I pronounced that right? Miryam, some time ago. When she told me about her job, I just thought, I was like, this isn't real life. There's no way this is what a UX designer does. But she's had a lot of experience at big FAANG companies, some big tech companies, and her experience is very different from my experience. I think that's something absolutely worth talking about, and we're going to talk about some of that today. So Miryam has 8 years of experience across many companies, from startups of 6 to publicly traded companies with 60,000 employees, including places like Apple, Instagram, Twitter, back when it was actually Twitter, and more. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, you're also trying to get poached by TikTok right now. Is that accurate? Are you still going through that, or did...
Yeah, I got the offer for TikTok stories, so we'll see. I'm excited about it, but I just really have to make sure it's the right opportunity.
We've got to keep Miryam at the top of that list there. So, all right, well, I want to talk about this today. I'm really excited. So you and I had a chance to chat a couple weeks ago, and I was telling this before, I wish we would have recorded that because it was such a great conversation. It was mind-blowing and eye-opening for me, for sure. But I know we said we're going to keep you anonymous, so I know I read your little bio, but can you give a little bit more of your background so everybody listening has some basis for your experience, as much as you're comfortable sharing? Tell us a little bit about you.
Okay, let's see. Well, I guess people usually talk about like their origin and stuff. My family is from a Levantine country that's in the news a lot lately. I feel like that already says so much about it. Grew up in a Latin American culture. You might be familiar with Shakira, or she's like Lebanese, but also Colombian.
Shakira. Oh, okay. Yeah, Shakira. Okay. Yeah. Hips don't lie, mama, hips don't lie. Like that. That's Shakira. Yeah.
Exactly, you
That's all
get
I know.
it.
Yeah.
Exactly, but yeah, so she's, like, Colombian and Lebanese, and there's, like, a good amount of Levantines in, South America, so that's kind of I know it's, like, not well known, but yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah, there's, like, surprisingly a lot of different kind of Asian immigrants to South America. Arabs, a lot of Arabs, there's a lot of, like, East Asians, so that's kind of, like, my background, and then I went to this, like, really cool high school in Miami, and it was, like, this fine arts program. It's not like it taught me things that I use in day to day, but it's more like it instilled certain, like, values, I think, in me, and it was, like, this, really great, like, public school, which is crazy because like, who has anything good to say about, like, high school or public school, I guess, but it was awesome. I think, like, I became, like, extremely perfectionistic while I was there, or maybe I always was and I just didn't know, but the values that I learned there were very much about, like, good craft and, like, tenacity, like, rigor. I don't know. People are just I don't know, they were bringing in these, like, 14-year-olds, and they would turn them out at 18, and they would be going to, like, Cooper Union, RISD, like, really top art schools or whatever, like and the artwork that they're making at this high school, like, it looks like they're 30-year-olds, like, the type of paintings that they're making, they're going to, like, PAFA, whatever, it's, like, really incredible. So, the kids were just very talented but, I mean, it's, like, fine arts, right? So, I got into RISD and so did, like, all my other friends. They give, like, something called a presidential scholarship, I think is what it was called, which is, like, 50% tuition, but it wasn't enough because my family so their tuition, I think, $60,000 a year, and, like, unless it was
Oh
free
my God.
99, I wasn't going. Like, we were broke, bro, like, we were, like, down bad, like, down catastrophically, like, I couldn't even afford the ticket to Boston, like, even a one-way ticket, like, I couldn't
Wow.
even so it was just, like, so bad. But anyways, I went to this, like, fine art school in Boston, and they gave me a full tuition scholarship, which is why I could go.
Oh,
But
that's
see,
awesome.
I was, like, not financially literate, so I still took out loans to pay for my living costs. I wasn't smart because the first year I definitely needed it. Anyways, I took out that first set of loans from the government, but then I was too scared to reject them every other year, so I just kept borrowing, and I
Oh,
didn't
no.
know that you could, like, pay your debt, like, while you were accruing it. So by the
Oh,
time I
yeah.
graduated, like, I had $55,000 in debt, which and then there was, like, also the interest on top of it that I didn't even know like, I was so dumb, like, just so dumb, like, I so embarrassed, but that's the truth. I obviously had been working full time, so I actually had a bunch of money saved up. Money just I guess I never had any, so I didn't know what was a lot
Right.
and what
Yeah.
was not
Yeah.
a lot. Anyways, I had, like, a bunch of money saved up. So then by the time I graduated, I put, like, all my savings into my loans because I was like, "Oh my god." But while I was in school, I was like, "Wait a minute." And I, like, realized, like, okay, loans are real. This is not just funny money. I was like, how am I gonna pay any of this back? Like, what is a job? My parents are not professionals and they don't have careers. Like, I'm pretty convinced that, like, my family just passes around the same $20. Like, I don't know what they do. I don't know. So I didn't know what a career was. And me and my sister always joked
Planted
about this
something
all the
right.
time
I
when we
don't
were
know.
entering the American workforce. We were like, what is a job, dude? What do we do? So, anyways, yeah, when I was like getting close to graduation, I was like, okay, wait, I have all this debt. Like, and I was like doing the math and I was like, the math is not mathing. Like, this
The
is
math
crazy.
isn't
Who let
mapping.
me do this? Like, I was like, who let me do this? Like, what is wrong with me? And I just felt so dumb and I felt like I ruined my life. So then I was like applying to all these places. I probably sent out in my senior year or something, like in a very short amount of time, like 300 applications. And, I
Wow.
was like a fine artist and like I didn't know how to job. I know that sounds dumb, but like maybe I was dumb. I don't know. So then I didn't hear anything back until around the time I was graduating. And then I heard back from like two places and then one of them ghosted me and then one actually gave me an offer. And it was for $25 an hour to do some stuff in Sketch back in the day when Sketch was like the thing.
So just to clarify, are you going to school for fine arts? You get a BFA?
Yeah, I was like fine arts
Okay.
and I did, like, a bunch of stuff, like, it's like when you go to an art school, you kind of end up doing a lot of different things,
Mm-hmm.
but I did, like, graphic design stuff, I even did, like, performance art,
Wow. Cool.
and I'm really glad I'm anonymous because like, I don't want anyone looking that up, that's embarrassing. But anyway
I'm gonna go look it up since we get out of here.
yeah, so I just had all this debt and, I needed to make money, and then I realized, like, I guess that I had a lot of regret. Like I said, I felt like I had ruined my life, and I felt really foolish for what I'd done. I guess, like, part of it is, like I think it's, like, families in general, even in the United States, but I think especially for ones outside of the United States, the idea of, like, an American degree has a lot of prestige. It's, like, an important status symbol, and so I was raised being told, like, "This is what you're gonna do. You're not gonna be like us. You're not gonna be like down bad working at like Pizza Hut or whatever. You're gonna be like an American girl, educated, you know, all these things. And I was deeply unprepared for, I think the reality of the situation, which is that I really shouldn't have done that. Like, I shouldn't have just been chasing status. I should have been chasing reality. But, life takes you in many different directions. And while I was there and kind of desperate to make money, I started making websites. And I started by making my own website. And
Oh, wow.
I
Okay.
kind of, yeah, I was like, oh, I want to put my work online. And I didn't understand like what WordPress was or anything like that. I didn't know any of that stuff. I was like, how do I make a website? Beep boop. And I kind of I accidentally sort of picked up some JavaScript. I just, like, accidentally started writing software, I guess, and then I found out that, like, people wanted websites. Like, that's a way to make money is you can buy and sell websites,
Yeah.
essentially. I guess I started realizing, like, software is, like, a real thing. Like, I never thought about it. Like, I always played around, like, on MySpace and Neopets, like, customizing the CSS and stuff like that back in the day when it was, like, CSS 1 and 2. I thought that was cool, but I didn't realize I was, like, doing stuff in software, and I never made that connection. But at some point, I put all those applications out, and then I found that this one random company, it's almost like a I hate to say it because I don't want to sound ungrateful, but it was a bit like a dated company that I guess is like Dropbox, but for like M&As, like mergers and acquisitions, and they mainly have clients that are like, Merck Bank and pharmaceuticals or whatever, where they're put maybe confidential like contracts in that. They don't put it in, like, Google Drive, they'll put it in something like that. Whatever, and it was just, like, a very dated company, but it was my first job, essentially.
So what was this job? Was that as a UX designer? It was your first job?
Yeah, okay, so I didn't know what the hell that was. I was just, like, applying places, like, real like, I was just like, "I don't know, let's go," like and then they were like, "Oh, you get in for, like" I think it was, like, UX, UI design or something like this. And I was like, "I don't know what the fuck that is, but, like, for $25 an hour, you can call me whatever the hell you want. Let's
20.
go." Whatever, and, yeah, so they were paying me $25 an hour, and it was, like, a five-hour daily commute to, like, the middle
Oh
of,
my
like
God.
like, literal, like, West Booty Hole, like, Massachusetts. I don't even know. It was, like, 2.5 hours in one direction and back. I was like, I desperately needed a job. But then while I was working there so I was working in Sketch and doing, like, sketch things, and one thing I realized, though, was, like, as time went on and I was doing that job, I realized, like, "Oh, this isn't a job, this is, like, a career." And I guess I accidentally found a career and accidentally ended up liking it. Um, and so I'm very fortunate that that happy accident happened, but I didn't intentionally get into UX. I mean, back in the day, like, when I was getting started, like, I don't think people really knew like, it wasn't like a thing like it is today, you know? And I remember even being at the job, and then there would be, like, lunch and learns or whatever they would call it. And they would do, like, "What is UX design?" Like, on the UX design team. Like, the designers would, like, present, like, "What is UX design?"
Oh
or
wow.
whatever, and,
Okay.
like, and I was like and I would be and, like, they're paying me, and I'm like, "Oh, cool. I didn't know that's what this is." Like I'm like and, like, I really was, like, so, like, surprised that this was, like, a thing, and, because I like I said, like, my parents are not professionals, and so I came from this mentality of, like, everything's just a job, right? Then I realized that, oh, these people are, like, professionals, like, these are properly, like, middle class people with, like, continuity in their jobs. They have a career, they have a narrative, they have a vision. I thought it was, like, really inspiring and really cool, and I felt like I was surrounded by people who were, like, serious about their lives, I guess. Oh, which is, like, maybe the first time that's ever happened. While I was there, I definitely felt like I was like, "Oh, is this the American workplace? Like, is this what it's like?" It's very much like maybe you get, like, free coffee. I mean, I don't like coffee, and I never have, but maybe you'll offer, like, free coffee, but there are people walking around in suits sometimes. It felt very much like the stuff I would watch in, like, shows like Better Off Ted, I guess, or, like, the memes that like, stock photos. Like, it felt like I was, like, in a
A
stock
lot of
photo.
people shaking
Yeah.
hands and smiling.
Yeah, throwing up money, eating salad, I don't know, and I was like, "Is this, like, what it's like?" And I felt very out of the loop, I guess, because I was, like I don't know, I think I was, like, 20 or something, and I felt like a little kid amongst adults, which I was, I guess, in some sense. I don't know, I just felt like I didn't fit in, and then I was like, "Is this really it?" But then I would see, like, propaganda from Google, and I'm like, "Wait, but that feels like a different kind of company," and I always thought that, like, the marketing from Google, like, was so cool, like, nap pods and, like, pool or whatever, games that they would fucking whatever, and I'm like, "Wait, but, like, I wanna work at something like that. Like, I wanna work with people like that. Like, they seem fun. They seem, you know, fun, fresh, and for real. Like, I wanna, and then I would compare it to, like, my workplace. I'm like, "Hmm." So I always felt like there was a difference, at least somewhere. Like, there was something like, I would think about, like, these cool, like, companies popping up now that are making apps, and I'm like, "Ooh, that's kinda," and then I'm like, "No, but it's probably fake," like, because I would look around and, but then, as time went on, I was just feeling like I started feeling this drive, like I said, to find maybe, like, a more cool workplace. I don't know how to explain it, but I just had this feeling that there was something better out there. And I connected with a bunch of people internally who also felt the same way. And they were like, "Oh, yeah, like, I'm more accustomed to startups." I'm like, "What's a startup? What's that?" Like, and they're like, "Oh, well, startups are so cool. Like, there's, like, a lot of young people there." And, like, and I was feeling kinda like odd one out type of thing because I was always, like, the youngest
You
one.
could play ping pong, and there's a keg.
Yeah, and like, yeah, and you can, like, take off whenever and, like, flexible hours, and, I'm, like, having a 5-hour daily commute,
Oh,
getting there at
yeah.
9 a.m., whatever, and, like, I don't know, the way that they talked about it, because the people that I had linked up with internally, they were, like, acqui-hires from this, like, random startup or something, and
Oh,
they, like,
okay.
made it sound so cool, and I was like, "Okay, so, like, how do I get in on this, like, startup shit, man?" And they were like, "Oh, well, like, yeah, like, here's some cool startups in the area or whatever," and then they, like, gave me a list of, like, cool startups that they know of. Some of them were, like, angel investors and some of them or something. So anyways, I just, like, reached out to some of those people, and those startups were, like, really small too. They had, like, 6 people, 8 people. So it was, like, pretty easy to get in contact with them. So you could just, like, literally DM, like, like, the CEO or whatever. And, like, I would hit them up and I'd be like, "Hey, like, I'm, like, a designer," and, like, I realized, like, I knew that word now, and I knew what the word developer meant now, and, like, I was doing, like, development stuff as well. So I would, like, DM them and be like, "Oh, like, I'm a designer and a developer here in, like, Boston, and, like, I wanna work at a startup, and I want hands-on experience and whatever." And then eventually some of them would bring me in for an interview, and I ended up getting this job at this other startup, still pretty far from my home, still like a maybe 4-hour daily commute, and it was for a little less money. But I think I had healthcare, some good healthcare, that because, like, the first job I had, the healthcare was, like, not good. That company was a little weird. I was a designer and a developer there at the same time. I was the only design hire, but I was a junior developer as well. It was a Laravel web app. Then after some time there, I was like, "Okay, like, I definitely know, like, what this career is now." Like, I started to really understand it, and I felt like the values that I had from high school were surfacing, and I was very, like, rigorous. I don't know how to explain it. Like, I started understanding, okay, I'm making interfaces for software, and in some cases, even writing the software. I started being, like, really intense about, like, the visuals and stuff. I don't know, I think I'm just, like, that type of person. Like, I remember I would, like, make some concepts for, like, at that small company I mentioned, they would be like, "Oh, we like, maybe this feature could be a cool thing to work on this week," and then I would make a couple concepts, and they're like, "Man, the visuals are, like, really good." That type of feedback was, like, addicting, and I was, like, really obsessed with good visuals, and then at this point, like, I had a smartphone, like, I got a smartphone, like, I think, like, my last year of university, and it had all these, like, cool apps on it, and I was seeing, like, beautiful things that were I thought were beautiful. I was like, "Okay, there's, like, something going on here. Like, I wanna make this stuff. Like, this stuff is pretty. This stuff is craft. This,"
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it
yeah.
connected to this thing I liked about high school, which was, like, the intensity and the rigor. I just started working towards that, and then I was like, "Alright, my next job, like, I wanna work at this, like, cool type of company, even cooler than this." There wasn't really any logic outside of, like, I just wanna work at a cooler and cooler company. Like, I
I
don't
mean,
know,
if that's
like,
what you want,
I don't
there's
know,
nothing
and,
wrong
like,
with
I
that.
wasn't really thinking that deep, but it meant a lot to me at the time. Increasingly, my jobs were involved less and less development work. At some point, like, I was like, "You know what? Silicon Valley is the," I learned what Silicon Valley was. I learned what, it's funny is whenever I talk to my friends, like, back from high school and I say, "Oh, I'm in the Bay Area," they're like, "What's that?" 'Cause I didn't know what it was either. I don't
Yeah.
know, like, Miami's, like, a different place. I feel a little bit like Miami's just, like, South America too. I don't know. It's like Cubans and Venezuelans are the majority of people there, I feel like, and like, Dominicans too and stuff, but it's, like, mainly, like, South American, Caribbean type thing, and it's different to, like, let's say, like, California, which is, like, the majority Hispanic population is, Mexican, which is different. Like, you definitely feel the difference between
Sure.
maybe
Yeah.
Mexicans and, like, South American, Caribbeans type. It's a subtle difference, but whenever I talk to friends from my high school, I'm like, "Oh, like, oh, yeah, I'm in the Bay Area." They're like, "Oh, where are you at?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm in the Bay Area." And they're like, "What's the Bay Area?" And I'm like, "Oh, like San Francisco." They're like, "Oh, okay, I know what that is." Yeah, at some point I wanted to go to the Bay Area, and because I started realizing like, okay, like all the cool jobs that I want to work at are like actually there. I thugged it out and then managed to like land a job at a cool tech company in San Francisco. I feel like that was my first like real big girl job in the sense of like I really felt like I was in tech. Like I knew what tech was and I felt like I was in it. Everything before that like felt like fake news. I don't know. Like reflecting back on it, it was just like it's just a different thing. But like once I started working at that company, I was like, "Okay, this is the tech industry, and, like, I am squarely in it, and this is my life now."
So you mentioned something that I think is kind of worth like, and this is sort of the distinction that I think I really want to like kind of dig into a little bit. You mentioned I'm finally in tech, and at that point, you had multiple UX jobs,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of people when they hear UX, they just assume tech. Oh, well, the tech companies. You know,
Yeah.
I'm going to get a job at a tech company. I'm a UX designer. But and I think this is the really interesting thing, and I want to talk a little bit about this now. This idea like UX at a big tech company versus UX at what just a company that builds software,
Yeah.
right? And this is sort of goes back to that conversation that we had a couple weeks ago, where I have been doing UX design since like 2011. I got my first UX job, and every job that I've ever had sounds completely different and foreign to me than the job you describe working at some of these big tech companies. I want to talk a little bit about that because I think that's something that a lot of people, junior designers, people career shifting into UX assume I'm going to be at a tech company, but that's not every job that is a UX designer job. So I want to talk a little bit about that from your perspective, working because you did work at some of these other, non-tech companies doing UX and you worked at the big tech companies.
Yeah.
Compare and contrast some of those like big tech versus the traditional, quote unquote, traditional UX type of work.
So real. There are definitely differences, and they're big, and I would say that if you work as a designer, this is something that I think a lot of people maybe don't appreciate, and I'm not the only one who feels this way. I one time got a comment when I post I used to post a lot on Medium, one year, and I got this comment that was really interesting, and it was this girl saying, like, basically the premise of it was, like, I was picking up on this like, I was trying to articulate this feeling of, like, there is a difference between working as a designer at a tech company and then a non-tech company, and I was trying to, like, verbalize it, and this one girl commented, she's like, I actually feel like no one ever has verbalized this before," and she's like, "I feel like a lot of new people to the industry or people in the industry who just maybe haven't worked at tech companies actually don't see this difference. And I think if more, she said, if more young people, new people to the industry knew of this difference, then it would substantially change the way that they plan their careers and the skills that they focus
Yes.
on. And I agree with her. And it was that comment that really made me realize, oh shit, okay, this is for real. Like, I'm not the only one noticing this. And I definitely think that there is something to this. And I think her remark that this will affect how you plan your career and how you think of yourself is true. And so I really am grateful to her comment because it really made me think about that.
That's funny that you mentioned that because I've actually been following you for longer than we've known each other. And I would read your articles and it was never like, oh my God, this woman's an idiot. Like, what the hell is she talking about? It was more like the job she's describing is completely foreign to me.
Yeah.
And I think that's when I started to realize too, very similar. I had never worked at a big tech company before. So my assumption is always like, UX design, you do research, you talk to users, you do all this other stuff. And when I read the stuff you would write, I would be like, this isn't the same job that
Me
I
too.
know, and it was such a foreign thing to me. And it honestly, like, I don't know the right word. Like off-putting maybe was the right word
Yeah.
because I sort of like, I don't it wasn't like I was angry about it or anything, but I was just like, I'm trying to think of the right way to describe it. It was more like I've been missing something. Like I have been assuming this entire time, and I was wrong that UX, quote unquote UX, is the same across the board. And you listen to a lot of people, thought leaders that are UX thought leaders,
Mhm.
and they hammer this home. You do research, you talk to users, you do blah 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 blah, and this is how you do it. If you don't do it, you're not a UX designer. And when I read this, I'm just like, whoa, there's this other thing out there. And this was back in the day too, when I would always hear people say product designer. I'm like, product designer, UX designer, same thing. And then it wasn't until you and I started talking where I realized like, whoa, these are very, very, very different jobs that, just like you said, require different skill sets, different mentalities, different thought processes, different, education channels, if you want to call that, different,
Mm.
mediums to read and places to learn from, and thought leaders, if you want to call them thought leaders, to kind of follow.
I agree.
Anyway, I don't know. I just want to throw that out there because like I felt that same thing. Like when I read your stuff, I'm like, what is she talking about? No way.
You are so real for that. Like, so true, Bastiana. No, like, you're so real for that because I guess, like, even I didn't fully, like, internalize this. Like, I don't know, like, when I was talking earlier about, like, I was like, "Oh, I wanna work at sexy companies. I wanna work at cool companies. Ah." Like, I wasn't thinking like, "Oh, there's the tech industry and there's the" no like, I wasn't thinking about that. Like, I was just like, "Ooh, that's cool marketing. I wanna work there. I wanna have the nap pod." Yeah, yeah. But the thing about it is that heuristic, I think that's what it is. It's a heuristic. Like, I didn't realize that I was tracking for tech companies. Like, I just wanted to work at, like, cool companies like Google, and that's how I thought of it. That's what I felt in my heart was authentic to me and what I was interested in. And I knew that when I looked at cool companies like Google, it didn't look like the one I was working in like West Booty Hole, Boston or Massachusetts. And I knew there was a difference, and I don't know what it was, but it was something. And and I wanted that. And so I think like people do intuitively feel that in their heart that there is a difference, but I think few people can articulate it. And it took me like months of writing to really realize, okay, yeah, I think I've figured out language to talk about this. And I chose to refer to this like Google Nap Pod company compared to like this one in West Booty Hole, Massachusetts. Like, oh my God, I feel so bad saying that. Like, you know what I mean? Those two companies, like if you were to take them as like representative samples, I prefer to refer to that schism as like the tech companies versus like non-tech companies. They're both software companies because both those companies mainly just sell software when you think about it. But the way that they think about software, the way that they hire, the way that they like their benefits, their work culture, the work style, the day-to-day, your responsibilities are different. They're just different. And of course, it is true that every company is different. But I would say that the biggest difference between like in your career, like the biggest decision you can make, in my opinion, as a designer is picking between whether you want to go work at traditional software companies or you want to work at tech companies because it is not the same.
Yeah, and something I want to call out here is I think this is something that mantra of go fast and break stuff,
Yeah.
whatever it is, build
Yeah.
fast and break stuff is often like poo-pooed a lot by what we might call quote unquote traditional UX designers, right? And I think there is a huge distinction between the companies that go fast and break stuff and the people that really laser focused on building the right thing first, right? When you look at those businesses, the things that they are designing and building are often very different. And so when I think about a big tech company, let's say Meta, for instance, building something like Facebook or Instagram,
Mhm.
and then you've got this company in West Booty Hole, Massachusetts, that was designing financial file management software. Let's think about the risk associated with being wrong, right? And if I happen to design something that is not the user's not happy with on Instagram, what is the risk there, right? I might lose a user or two.
Yeah.
But on this other side, the financial institute, let's say someone screws up and we lose a document and that's cost us millions of dollars, or some contract that cost us millions or multi-million dollar contract over the course of a year or something. And so like there are real, there's risk involved with being wrong.
Yeah. I guess like you could think about risk in other ways though. Like Apple has a lot of pressure to release bangers. Every time they make a release, it has to bang. So if they make a release and it doesn't bang, their stock price, they will feel it. So there's a lot of pressure at that company to sustain good performance. Whereas like
Right.
I think something like Meta, for instance, is a little more volatile. They have bangers, sometimes they have flops, and that's seen as acceptable. But so like even within tech companies, there's a bit of like different risk tolerance, but they do have significant fear of risk because they're like some of the most profitable companies on the planet. And so if they do get something wrong, no one's gonna die. That's true. Although, like for instance, if Figma got something wrong, then that would upset a lot of really important businesses. Or, if Uber got something wrong, maybe they could cause accidents potentially or cause safety problems.
That's certainly true. Now that begs the question then,
Mm.
like like when you and I talked, I think one of the things that you brought to light that I had just absolutely no idea it was even a thing is that a place like Apple doesn't really do research.
Yeah, that's right. I think it depends on the team too, but like
Okay.
all the teams I know of, like iOS, like Maps. I think like even Apple Music. I think Apple Music, like there's like readouts at the beginning of the year from some third party company or something. I don't know, but the more that you get into, like, let's say, like, the iOS and macOS side versus, like, the services side, like music and maps and stuff like that, there's even less research.
So that's like that to me is like the mind-boggling piece of this, because if there is that much risk and they are that intolerant to risk, how do they consistently produce products that people want to buy without doing the due diligence to understand if what they're building is correct? There is, I mean, can you say that though? It's just, they're just that good. I mean, like, there's got to be some.
Yeah, I mean, they're good with that. No, I'm kidding.
I mean, but I feel like there's got to, like, yes, you can hire really great product designers, but like at the same time, like those product designers come with their own set of biases and presumptions that are not always going to be accurate. And that's like the value in research, is taking that bias out of it and really making sure that you're objectively doing the thing right. And the thing that, like, I think blows my mind when we think about tech companies and the lack of research, or, you know, you mentioned this before. They do have researchers and there are research, but the designers generally are not interacting with users. And so that piece to me is like mind-boggling a little bit, that like they do have this risk and they do have this sort of like risk intolerance in a way, yet they don't do the processes and stuff that would alleviate some of that risk, which is like weird to me. And I don't know, but I mean, clearly they're doing something right. What is your thought there? I'm curious. Like, what is your? I don't want to like keep beating this dead horse, but like, I'm just curious, like your thoughts. Like, how do you balance those things?
I think it's such an important topic, but I guess like the only thing that comes to mind is like there's many ways to peel an orange, I suppose. And like you can have really good outcomes and do things really different. Like for instance, like Saudi Arabia is a wealthy country, but it's the complete opposite to the United States, which is also a wealthy country within that same wealth bracket. And, there's important differences in how they make their money and whatever, but like just at least on the surface level, they're both wealthy countries, but they're complete opposites. One's a theocracy, the other one's a, proper like whatever liberal democracy or whatever from the West. So there are many ways to peel an orange. Like you don't, to be successful, like there's different ways to be successful, I suppose. And so I think there's room for everyone, but I guess it goes back to our original question, which is why it's important. It's like there are many ways to be successful, many ways to formulate your career within, software. But I think it's important to be aware of these differences. And, like if you want to be a, move, or you want to have like a good quality of life, it's important for citizens to know that if there's a country that you don't want to live in, there are other options where you can still have a great quality of life. And that may, in fact, even align more with your values. So migration is possible. And this is, I guess, like I'm just using that as a metaphor to say, if I think it's important to be able to talk about like there is a wide variety of experiences in the software industry. There's like more traditional software, there's more contemporary, whatever companies, and you can be successful in either, but you should be aware that they are different. So that's one thought. And then my second thought, and more directly answering your question, which is I think the way that they're successful is probably different per team, because like I think it's especially true at Apple in specific that like at Instagram, like you'll have these like visual roadmaps that you do every half. So it's every 2 quarters. And like you just post it and like anybody can see it, unless it's like a super low key project that like no one is supposed to know about. But that's like rare. And so you can see anyone's roadmap, but it's not really the case at Apple. Like you need disclosures to be able to go to certain buildings, like to even go to certain floors, to even talk about certain things. Like there's a disclosure system internally.
Oh, wow.
So you can't just like tell anybody else about anything, even at the company. So it's different per team, I was chatting with one of my friends who's like, he's on iOS. This individual said, there's no researchers. And he said, this is specifically what he said. He's like, there's no place for researchers in product development. And we both came from Instagram and we were all actually on the same pillar. And, I wanted to ask him what he thought about like his experience at Instagram, but we kind of talked about it. And like, he seemed to strongly indicate that he didn't find their insights useful. I feel so bad saying that.
That's kind of interesting. Like, is that a sentiment that you would share, or do you feel like that isn't accurate? Because I do want to talk a little bit. Maybe this is a good time to pivot, because I want to talk a little bit about the actual job of being a product designer at a big tech company versus a more traditional software tech company. When you mentioned research, I want to talk about that one first. So, like, as a designer on these product teams, your friend mentioned that they didn't see a place for research. Or researchers, I guess.
Yeah.
Not to say research, but researchers. I guess he's maybe I don't know. You tell me. He's really talking more about like the specific role of the person who does research, not to say we shouldn't do research. Anyway, talk to me a little bit about that from your experience from one and the other when it comes to research.
I will say that it varies per company. So for instance, at Instagram, you have embedded researchers on your team and like they could even be your homie. Like you can ideate with them. And like one of my researchers, like I mean, I feel like I was always tight with my researchers. Like even when there'd be reorgs or whatever, like and we'd get a new researcher, like I was always tight with them. And they were always like whenever I was doing road mapping. So designers at Instagram are expected to drive the roadmap. So basically you get like a theme, like leadership will give you like a theme that's like, okay, you're like a stories creation team. So I was on the stories team. They will tell you, okay, so you're on the stories creation team, so you're supposed to incentivize people to want to post, you want to keep it fresh, you want to keep it fun. So you basically work with your PM and your researcher, and if your content designer is like wanting to be involved, they can be. If they want to be involved as well, they can do that. But it's like the core like team is like usually like an engineering manager, a product manager, and a designer. And anyone else who wants to be involved can also be. It's fine too. Like it's not a big deal. But designer is expected to lead. You make visual roadmaps. You're constantly pitching whatever. The researchers would do various things. I'm not a researcher, so I don't know exactly all the. I feel like I'll be misrepresenting them a little bit, so I apologize. But I saw various things from my observation. I saw things that I think they refer to as ethnographic studies, year-long studies where they would do diary studies with teens because that's a major focus at Instagram is like a teen focus. And they would do like diary studies and they wouldn't it wasn't like a specific product thing. There was like a researcher that I worked with over the year and he had frequent diary studies and stuff with 14-year-olds and they were in high school and he would ask them like how do you make friends, like how do you like when do you use digital stuff to make friends, like how are you different on I don't know, those types of questions. And he did it for a whole year and then he presented his findings and stuff. And so that was like one thing and he said that's atypical in his experience to do a study that long and he's like you would only do it at a company like Meta, or these types of companies where they would really prioritize that. And he also said that so he came from State Farm, I think, which I would say is a non-tech company. And he said that, like the pace at Meta is much faster, which I think is true. That's one of the, I guess, like going back to the top question, which is like the differences between them is like, I think in general, the pacing at tech companies, whether it's a big tech company or a small one like Figma or Notion, the pace is going to be faster. It's going to be much faster. The expectations are higher. You're going to be iterating a lot. You're going to be typically, depending on your level, if you're like more junior, it might not be the expectation, but generally even juniors are expected to be leads. And so there's a lot of pressure. The pressure is even higher when you have parts of teams that you're working on that are like very high priorities to the business. So if you're working on, let's say, Instagram stories or Instagram reels, it's very high pressure, very, very high pressure compared to, let's say, I don't know, Instagram trust and safety, like the settings for like privacy and controlling like interactions with teens, with like flagged adults or whatever. Like that sounds bad, but like it's a priority. But like,
I was just thinking, like,
you know what
isn't
I
it
mean?
sad that
Like,
that's not?
you know what I fucking mean? Priority in the sense of like,
That's not going to make the business money, is what you're saying.
yeah, I guess. Like, yeah, like priority in the sense of like we are scrutinizing every single little fucking detail. Like every single part of the UI has to be absolutely perfect. Every single part, like,
Right. If the
whereas
pixels are off on the like flagging
yeah,
system,
or
it's
like
not
this
going to be.
interaction doesn't
I
feel
get.
right,
Yeah.
or like when you flip this, that shouldn't do that, or like whatever. Whereas like safety is more about like policy and enforcing policy and like clarity or whatever, and like there's more liberties you can take with that, I suppose. But yeah,
Yeah.
anyway,
You
so
saved yourself. There you go.
yeah, there we go. I did it. Those differences between tech and non-tech companies are even like they'll even get as small as like how you dress, how you talk.
Wait, hold on. Like the person working, like how they dress and how they talk
I think so, yeah.
is
Like
scrutinized?
no, well, I mean, I feel like kind of yeah. Like at these types of companies, like I don't want to name names, but those types of companies.
So like if you're an old white dude with a gray beard and you use like slang from the 90s, like stoked, you're going to be like me.
I think that makes you wake.
Oh, does it? Okay.
But if you work at like more, let's say like dated companies, right, and then you like are like totally dude or whatever, like I just feel like you won't fit in. At least that was my experience, and maybe tech companies are a little bit more tolerant. I think of like different people. I don't know. That's my feeling. Whereas like maybe more dated companies are, I don't know, like more, all the guys are like really tall and they're like all my dad's age type thing. I don't know. Like it's a little awkward. Like I don't know. But yeah, so it's a different thing. And they dress like business casual, I guess. Whereas like At tech companies, like people show up in like flip flops and shorts and like I don't know.
Okay, all right. So you're not. I get what you're saying. You're not at the tech companies. Like the tech companies aren't like saying we're not going to hire this person because they're wearing like suspenders and a
Yeah.
pocket protector. Although maybe they would because that's like '90s are coming
No,
back, I guess now.
that's
So
so
like
cool. That
looking
is
like Steve
super
Urkel's
in.
cool. Yeah, that's like hip now, right?
Yeah.
But if you're wearing like I don't know, like I'm trying to think. Like I don't even know. I don't know what the kids are wearing these days. I have no clue. I get what you're saying. You're saying like
Like,
the culture of the team is just going to be different, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah. And
it's yeah. I feel you. Right.
it's
Okay.
I guess like it's still I'm still like I feel like often very much still like the younger end because I feel like most people are like 35 to 45, I guess. But like I think young people are like maybe tolerated more or I don't know, that sounds bad, but like you know what I mean. And like you can be a little like goofy and a little more I don't know. Yeah, so but I'm sure it depends on the company too, but you can just feel the difference. I'm going to say the word Adobe versus Figma. You know the difference. You feel it. It's in your heart. That's it. That's the difference. That's what it is. Yeah, so on the day-to-day though, it of course impacts your day-to-day. So at these like very intense teams. And another thing to know is that like there are teams even at these like, intense companies that are a little more traditional versus ones that are less traditional. So sometimes some parts of the company can feel less like a tech company than other parts of the company. So you might even work on, let's say, like Apple has a lot of like internal teams that do like internal stuff, and those teams might feel less like Apple than you might realize. So if you are
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
yeah, so like if you're working on iOS, you're gonna be a very different designer. You're gonna be very intense, like you're doing a lot of prototyping. You're probably gonna be writing code. There's a good portion of them that write code compared to like some of the people in, let's say, like internal teams that tend to skew more junior. So even like and you even feel the difference between like an L6, which is like a staff on like stories, is gonna feel very different to an L6 on, let's say, like maybe on a business type of team like an ads. They're very different. And even though it's the same level and the same title, and you even feel it like going from like Facebook to Instagram, there's like that difference. Like it's hard to get from Facebook to Instagram.
Is Facebook seen as like the old fogey and like Instagram is like the new hip
Yeah, I would
hotness or
say like
something? And then I like Threads is even more cool. Like they're like the elite like clique you can't even sit at their lunch table.
I would say like yeah, I feel like Instagram is a little bit like the Regina George maybe of of the company. That sounds bad, but like you know what I mean. It's like you can't sit with us, whatever. And like it's a little bitchy, but like there are I think some valid things to it. And like I'm not trying to defend it, but like there are some valid things. Like especially on specific pillars, like specific pillars at Instagram, like the Instagram stories, like the pillar that contains stories and reels, you have to be prototyping. Like it's very difficult to succeed on those roles unless, and what I mean by prototyping is not smart anime on Figma. I'm not talking about that. That's easy. I'm talking about like you're using origami and you are basically writing JavaScript because underneath the hood, all those patches are just JavaScript functions. You might even be writing custom JavaScript patches, but it's less common. It's very technical and they're not easy roles and you have to move very, very fast. You have to iterate a ton and there's a lot of approval layers and a lot of storytelling, like people call it storytelling. Sorry, I'm very bitchy about that. It's a lot of that and I've heard people, even on this podcast or elsewhere talk about like the best thing you can do for your career is join a startup. And that's how you learn the most. I really strongly disagree with that. I think the highest performing teams at tech companies, like they're typically bigger tech companies. Like for instance, if you are lucky early career to land a job on IG stories or IG Reels or iOS or Mac OS, like you're like so OP. Like you're just so OP, it's unreal. Like the pace at which you're going to be moving is insane. You're going to have no work-life balance. I'm sorry, but you're just not. It's really stressful. The scrutiny is really high. You're going to be making a shit ton of designs. Your files are going to look massive. You're going to have so many iterations. And you're also going to be leading the strategy on your team, even if you're a junior. Like, that's the expectation. The expectation might be a little lower. Like, if you make mistakes, it's fine. But, like, regardless, like, that is what you're going to be doing. Like, like, for instance, at Instagram, like I said, every 2 quarters, you do planning.
Yeah, so I want to talk about that real
Yeah.
quick because a second ago, or a few minutes ago, you mentioned the designers drive the roadmap.
Yes.
And you just talked about leading the strategy and stuff. So I want to understand at some of these big tech companies, like what is the UX designer's relationship with the product manager, and what types of product management type tasks or jobs would you be doing as a designer that a lot of other traditional UX designers wouldn't actually be doing?
Yeah, so basically, like on Apple Music, something that you'll hear people say is like the designer is even above the product manager. So there are technically not product managers on Apple Music, but they're a little bit more like marketing people that provide like insights on like entertainment. So like, the entertainment industry, there's like, oh, like so and so artists are becoming popular and like this is how people are listening to things and like, just they give you like the updates on like the entertainment industry, I guess. And that helps you kind of know more about like, how customers listen and stuff. But like ultimately it's designers and design leadership that makes the final call about what is put on the roadmap. And some of that happens, at least at Apple Music, in like kind of a dark, smoky room, which is a little bit more Apple style. But I would say, like, for instance, at Instagram, like I said, like leadership will be like, okay, so you're a stories designer and you're working on the creation team versus like somebody might be working on like the consumption experience or part of it. And there might be another designer, working on, this other theme that they call like participatory sharing or something like this. But basically, like, you have kind of a theme that you get as an Instagram designer, and then you're supposed to link up with your team, facilitate the discussion, and whatever you want to do, this brainstorming, whatever it is, to come up with concepts that fit that theme. And basically, and you have to do that very fast. You get about 4 weeks total to come up with new concepts that respond to the theme that they give you. And then you gotta week over week, you gotta develop the ideas, you gotta pitch them, and then at the end of the 4 weeks, you have to have a final visual roadmap with your portfolio of work that is approved by leadership of what you're going to work on for that half. So you have to in 4 weeks.
Wow.
And I don't mean like typically like Opal screens, like you want to be making prototypes and stuff like that. So it's very, very fast. And that's a commitment that you're making for the next like six months or whatever. It's kind of like 4 because you're a little bit ahead of engineers usually. And then by the time you start the half, you're really quickly digging yourself out of a hole because you have a bunch of new concepts that you have to deliver on and make final designs on and like dig yourself out of a hole to like make sure that your engineers aren't sitting on their hands. It's really fast paced.
Now, see, that what you're describing right there is so incredibly foreign to me as something that a UX designer would traditionally be responsible for. Is that common in big tech companies, or is that just this one specific team that functions this way?
I would say yes, and our buddy, I don't know, can I say his name? Frank Bach.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
so our buddy Frank Bach, he's on what would be my pillar, but he can testify like even on other like teams that are not like related to stories or whatever are doing that as well. So it's certainly widespread at Instagram. Also, I can confirm it's also widespread at Airbnb. When you chat with people there, like even the recruiters make it very clear they do not hire junior people. They hire specifically senior and staff level people, and they hire people who are the expectation at Airbnb. From what I can see, is that the designers are leading the roadmap. And of course, you can't just be, this is the idea we're working on it. You have to get leadership approval, but it's a very similar style to what I just described. There's a range, like you might be embedded on a specific team, like let's say in my case, like with stories, or you might be a floater. So you might have a couple different themes that you're working with, and you have to concept against those multiple themes across different teams. That might be the case. And yeah, and then also, I think it's a little bit different on some teams at Apple, like, but I think it depends. Like on iOS, like you'll get like a theme from leadership, and it's a very small, like there's only like, I don't know, maybe it's like 10 designers on iOS. It's like leadership will say something like broad, like how can we do this such and or enable such and such experience with your phone or something. And then you have to come up with concepts that fit into that. So the designer's job is very pitching, pitching, pitching. And I would say this is very widespread at tech companies and becomes the expectation as you become senior and staff. If you're like more of a junior designer, which are uncommon at these companies, but if you are one, then you might be like forgiven if you don't fully participate or something like maybe you'll have other people on your XFN, your cross-functional party, who will maybe pick up the slack for you and help you come with content. I don't know, but even juniors, I think, are just expected to do that.
When you think about like the role of like product designer versus UX designer, is that what you think of like product designer as being the person who drives strategy, who does their own research, who ideates on their own thing, who pitches their own ideas, who drives the strategy and the roadmap for their own product, versus UX team who traditionally works with a product manager and the three-legged stool, as you hear often, and kind of understanding and working together. When you think about like product designer versus UX designer, is that the main distinction that you're kind of thinking about? Or is it even more broad than that?
Whether or not you have a product manager, like let's say at Instagram, you're still as a designer expected to be like the final lead on it. It's not like you can't rely on other people to come up with cool ideas. Like that certainly happens. Like a product manager can totally come up with a cool idea or anyone. And it's a team effort. Like people are spitballing ideas and we're like, oh, this could be cool. And we're excited about this idea. But ultimately, the designer, whether like, I don't know, like a lot of designers internally will say things like, PMs rely on us so much to come up with ideas, and we're always expected to have like a silver bullet idea. And there's a lot of pressure to always come up with the new best thing. And it's always coming from design. And like people have said that in retros, saying that they wish they could rely on cross functional partners more for more ideas. Because it's a lot of pressure. On top of coming up with all the ideas, you're also executing on it to a very high degree of detail. And not just making mocks, you're making those intense interactions, you're flicking things, you're flipping things, and you're writing all this like essentially visual code to make that happen. And it's a very hard and demanding job. So I would say like the biggest difference between what I recall from working in like more traditional companies is you just take on a lot of responsibility as a designer. I remember at the more traditional companies I worked at, there was like UX designers and then there was UI designers. And like the UX designers would be like, in Sketch making these like gray boxes, and then they would export PDFs of these like schematics almost, and they would pass it over to the visual designers, and then the visual designers would like make it look good and whatever. And then I guess like the UX designers wouldn't really come up with the ideas. I think it was like product owners and product managers as well.
Here's something that I think is kind of interesting, and I want to hear. I'm going to tell you this. You tell me your thoughts. When you think about like traditional UX, we often hear, you're not the user, right? Like, let's think about enterprise software. In your example, banking document storage, right? Like, you're not a banker. You're not managing documents. You have no idea what that person needs, wants, doesn't need, what their workflow looks like. In an enterprise environment, you generally have no idea what someone doing a thing, a task that you have no idea how to do, how they would or would not want to use a software. And so, that mantra of you're not the user makes a lot of sense. When I think about people working at Instagram, iOS, Threads, Facebook, Meta, they are the users generally. Like they're actually using the software. Their friends are using the software. They know how the software works. They know what they would want to do because when they go home and they get a break, they're going and they're sharing things and they're using the tools. And I'm curious, is there some distinction there when you think about big tech companies that a lot of times there are commercial tools that a lot of people will use? Is it safer to say that like you actually are the user a lot of times? Like, or is there still an inherent bias that we want to try to avoid? I'm curious, like what your perspective is there. Is that something you've ever thought about?
I have a couple thoughts on this. iOS serves, I don't know how many, is it like a billion people use iOS? So there's no way that these like, this like 35-year-old friend of mine or whatever on iOS is like the same thing as like my 62-year-old mom who like can't speak English. And also like I'm not a teenager anymore. I'm not my 16-year-old self. Like I said, Instagram has a teenager focus for strategic reasons. Yeah, and like I'm not a teenager anymore, and we have researchers that, the idea is that researchers can help us understand the teenage mind via some of those studies that I mentioned earlier about like following kids. Hey kid, how do you make friends at school?
But for a second, can we just like talk about how kind of bizarre it is that I assume an older man
Yeah.
is following around 14-year-old girls,
It's
asking them
so
how they make
funny.
friends? It just seems like such a weird thing for Facebook to put like a man on. Like, put a freaking
I know,
woman
he's
on
super
this
chill.
research project.
I love him. He's such a great guy.
Oh, I'm sure he's great.
But no, I know you I know what
Impropriety
you mean.
assumed. It's just the perception from someone on the outside.
It
Yeah.
is so funny. No, I know what you mean. It's some of this stuff like just has to crack you up. And like sometimes it's like, hey kid, like we're talking about like, oh, like teenies are like they're paying attention to their crushes. Like they're obsessed with their crushes. And I'm like, oh my God, like what the hell? Like I'm not a 16-year-old girl anymore. Like stop. And it feels so cringe. But like you're not always gonna be your user, but also like I don't know how important that really is. I know everyone says like, oh, you're not your user, and like that's important. Like but like I don't know, like it's just not really like that at tech companies. Like people even say like, yeah, I mean, I propose features that I think are cool. I remember when I joined, I asked like a colleague of mine, I was like, oh, how do you guys come up with ideas? And they're like, yeah, I just kind of make features that I think are cool.
So I have this interesting anecdote from like the opposite version of that where it failed miserably. I worked in my past life at a big giant aerospace company, and we had this software we were building to digitize the shop floor repair execution. So imagine this giant jet engine. You're looking at it. It's like 15 feet tall, 10 feet wide, all these like nuts and bolts and machines and pipes everywhere. And you've got to like track the repair process for this thing. And we came up with this, I thought, really great idea. Oh, we could do this thing. And we did a study, and they were like, that is never going to work. Like, there was just no way, And so, like, it was this really cool idea that we came up with. We did a usability study, we prototyped it, we brought it to the shop floor, and we had multiple, not just one, multiple people use it. And every one of them, not a single one of them, said, oh, wow, this would be useful for me, And so we scrapped the idea completely. And that, to me, just kind of like, it reinforced that in my head that, like, I'm not a mechanic, and I have absolutely no idea what these guys are doing when they're fixing a jet engine. So, like, for us, it was a lot of the observational kind of ethnography that you were talking about, and
Yeah.
watching them work, and then coming up with ideas on how to improve that over, like, oh, we've got this really cool idea, we could put this thing and blah, blah, blah. And it was just like, that kind of stuff was worthless for these guys. And so, again, it kind of goes back, though, to if I was a mechanic and I was doing that, I would probably have all kinds of crazy, awesome ideas. And I feel like as someone who working on Threads, for instance, or working on Instagram, because I'm using the tool, like, oh man, I would love it if it did this.
Yeah.
And so, like, I'd be able to come up with ideas more than I would if I was like, a 75-year-old grandma you asked to design in Threads or Instagram Reels, or like, they wouldn't be able to do it. So anyway, I don't know. I just kind of an example in my head.
I think that's valid. And it does bring me to this thought I had, which was like, I do think designing tools, like things that are very utilitarian. So something that you described, or let's say like Asana, I hate to call them out, sorry. They're great. And like, I have so much respect for them. But yeah, working on like, let's say like Asana or whatever, I think I'm going to use the word like, I hate to say it, like, I don't mean this in a negative way. It's easier to work on tools because there's typically a task that you want to accomplish. And that has a kind of a finite start and a finite end. And as long as you understand
Yes.
typically like their workflow, then it's very easy to reason about what they might need.
Yes. I would agree with
And
that.
in that case, you might need to understand like their workplace, like whatever, all these things about them, in order to make a tool that is very specific to them. And I would say that especially if you're working with, let's say like an internal tool, typically the internal tools will service at a company. It depends on what the internal tool is, but like there's some that like, if you were an internal tools designer working on like the perf cycle tool at Google, which is like the internal like performance tool, that's used by the whole company. So that could be used by like 100,000 people, but there are also internal tools. It sounds like the one that you're describing is used maybe by dozens of people, not like tens of thousands or something. And you have like direct access to the person who will be using your tool. So you can make a
Right.
perfectly them-shaped knife. You can make a perfectly them-shaped hole.
And then test it before you actually build it to make sure that it's perfect. Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
You're exactly right. Yeah.
It's very like farm to table type thing. And it's very, I think, unambiguous, I think, in general, what they may need, especially because you can just ask.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I would even say like something like Uber and Airbnb and Lyft are much more straightforward things because they're essentially e-commerce, right? They're selling taxis versus or like hotel rooms. I think that there's still ambiguity in any of these spaces, but they're usually very like user job to be done driven. Whereas if you're working on a
Right.
space that's very ambiguous, like what's entertaining, what's fun, like that's so random. It's very
Yeah.
difficult to reason about that.
Since we had talked actually a while, because you mentioned this in our last conversation, and since we had that conversation, I've changed the way I explain things a little bit. What I used to say was, we are solving problems. Our job as UX designers is to solve a problem. And if you can't solve a problem with the tool, then you're not doing your job. That's what I used to say. And that's very true in the enterprise sense, where that person has a problem and I have to solve that problem, and I will do it with software. But on the commercial side and the stuff like you're talking about, a lot of times there is no problem, right?
Yeah.
Like Instagram didn't evolve to solve a problem. It evolved because of a desire for something that didn't
Yeah.
exist. So, it's
So
like I have a need to share. I have a need to interact with humans. I have a need to. So there's a lot more psychology involved with it.
yeah.
And manipulating that psychology in a way, which can be nefarious and obviously like, somewhat of like a dark pattern, but
I
I could see getting into dark patterns to manipulate that
a little bit.
psychology. But at the same time, like, I don't know if that makes sense. Does that ring true to you?
Yeah,
Like,
it
it's
definitely
like
does.
we're there because the user has a need, and we have to fulfill that need in some way, whether that's a problem or a desire or something.
It definitely does, and I think it goes back to, like, some fundamental aspect I could be wrong, I'm not, like, a fucking researcher into human whatever the fuck, but I get the sense that mammals, at the very least mammals, share this deeply mammalian psychology where we enjoy play intrinsically. All of mammalian children,
Yes,
like,
I'd agree with that.
whatever the fuck you call that, you tend to play, and even adults engage in play. And so I think that things like TikTok or Instagram or whatever have an entertainment play aspect that hooks into that typical like fundamental mammalian desire to play. I think there are other things that Instagram hooks into and TikTok as well is like the desire to show yourself. Maybe some people like to take part in these dance trends because they want to be seen as pretty and they want other people to see them as pretty or popular at school or and that we kind of refer to these as like people problems, I guess internally at like Instagram is how a lot of people use that term, is to say like, is there an underlying almost like mammalian desire, when we talk about the crush use case of Instagram, it's like, oh, I want to see if my crush is watching my stories, is he watching, oh my god, and like that's like how teens are feeling, and
Yeah,
like
yeah.
there's no like reason why, like it's not like they're trying to check a jet engine for failure and they have a specific goal. It's just like, I just wanna know if my crush is watching, like, does he think I'm cute? Like, do I have a chance, And let me slide into his DMs and vice versa, and it's just very, like, that space is, like, ambiguous, but I think even more ambiguous than, like, the crush, like, finding a date type of use case is, like, play. Play is, like, so hard, like, think about it, like, if you were to make a video game right now that bangs, that people love, like, think about, like, the some of the most successful video games of all time, like Minecraft. When you really look at it, it looks like dog shit. Sorry. Sorry, Notch. It's an amazing game. I love it. I play. But, like, it looks like dog shit. So does Roblox. Like, it looks like dog shit. It looks terrible, and it's so spammy. Like, it's kinda spammy in the sense of, like, just, like, all this crap you can do to like, all these but it's fun. It's fun, dude. I don't know. It just is. Don't ask me to explain why. It just is. And when these people make video games, like, they're not, like, doing research on, like, the ethnographic, whatever. They're just like, cool, haha, random seed generation of a world go brrr. Like Notch was just a random guy, like making a fun fucking world generator. And then he was like, that's cool.
And I think that's like such an important distinction to make too, because like the stuff that we're talking about, like my personal preferences, I have absolutely zero interest in ever working at Instagram.
I don't
You
believe
couldn't
you.
pay me enough money to have the some of the stuff that I've heard from people who work there. You can't, you're restricted in what you can do. You're restricted in how you can talk about the work outside, and I couldn't do this podcast if I had Instagram or if I worked at it. So like and then on top of that, the work life balance and stuff.
Ugh,
And I
yeah.
think it's worth noting that, like, this is just, yes, it's sexy. And yes, it looks great in a resume. And I'm sure you get a job doing this, you could probably work absolutely anywhere. And there are tons of benefits to it. But I think it's also worth noting that, like, it's not for everybody. And some people listening right now are probably like, oh my God, it sounds so cool. And some people are probably like, fuck no, like, I don't want it. Give me that job. I want to build enterprise
I
stuff.
agree.
And I think that's kind of worth noting. And I know you're not trying to say like one is better than the other, but I think it's, your point though about it being easier, I think it's absolutely true.
Yeah.
Right. And not easier
But
in the
also
sense that
in a
like those
bad
people are
way.
doing less.
Yeah, but
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's just more straightforward.
yeah, exactly. That's the word I'm looking for. Yes.
Straightforward is probably, but yeah.
Yeah,
So this is a better way to put it. We'll edit it out. We'll fix it in post.
for sure, for sure. And I'm so with you. And like that's exactly what I was trying to say. Like it's more straightforward, it's more easy to reason about like what people need. And that's not to say there aren't areas that
Hmm.
are potentially ambiguous. I think that's true about anything, but like the whole thing in Instagram is just like it's turtles all the way down. In a sense, it's just very ambiguous. It's very like what's fun, what's in, what's cool, what's entertaining. Like that's hard. Like it's just hard. Like I don't know, like, it's not straightforward to, like, reason about it, and, like, you don't know what's gonna be in, and, like, social media, like, goes in and out, and, like, following trend like, I don't know, it's crazy. So, it's a really tough environment to work in because there's really no way to, like, predict whether something is gonna bang with users or not, realistically. And
Yeah.
I think the
Yeah.
obvious fact of that is, like, how often it flops. Like, there are many times that's where, like, Meta has released things and it flops. Like, there's some recent stuff even that you have been referencing in this conversation, and I don't, like, wanna brag on them or anything, I'm not, but I'm just saying, like, it's the truth, like, there are gonna be flops. I think, like, ultimately, that kinda comes down to, like, having leadership with very strong vision, and I think that's the case at a lot of teams at Apple, is there's, like, this, like, the pace is really fast at Apple too, but the releases look slow. So from the outside, it's like major releases are happening every year, but you don't realize how many fucking iterations are going behind every single
Oh yeah.
thing that get released. And it's so fast. And the amount of reviews that you have to do, the amount of decks, the amount of scrutiny is intense at these companies. And you only see like, oh yeah, I see this release once a year, whatever, they're slow. No, it's not. This is no.
Right.
And yeah, so I like going back to what you were saying about like it's not right for everyone. That is true. Like I agree with that. And you have to find out like what feels right for you. I guess like the only reason why I started talking about this was because I feel like people don't make this distinction when they especially talk to career designers, and
I
this
agree.
became no more evident to me when like last year or whatever. I like mentored, I don't know why I did this, but like I mentored like 80 people. Like I don't know. And everyone I talked to, like I would talk about these things with them and they're like, "Well, that's not what I heard from my boot camp." And I'm like, I know. That's the
Yeah.
problem."
Yeah.
Like, and you're like, they're getting a call asking me like, "How do I work at Instagram? How do I work at Twitter? How do I work at Apple? How do I do that?" And I'm like, "Well, don't do any of the things that you're doing right now. I'm sorry." Like, don't follow whatever this curriculum is at RISD or whatever. Like, those people have never worked in the tech industry. Like, they don't know. And you can't be mad at them for that, you know? But I guess like the problem is kind of what you were talking about earlier. Like there are a lot of like quote unquote thought leaders for people who are like maybe traditional designers at traditional software companies that are advising like this is the truth. Here's the Bible. This is it. You do research, you do this, the PM does this, the designer does that. And designers don't code and they don't do this and they don't do that. And this is very specific. This is my job and this is not your job and it's not my job, whatever. And that's just not how it is at these companies. So when a pre-career designer comes to me and says, "How do I work at Instagram?" And then I'm like, throw away all your work and start over. You have to if you wanna work at Instagram, you have to work like Instagram. If you wanna work at Apple, you have to work like Apple. And that means that you need XYZ, and whatever you're doing at this University of Michigan or RISD or this boot camp, whatever, this is not it. This is good for if you wanna work at Target or if you wanna work at Walmart or, you know, these places, and I'm sure they're amazing workplaces, and you can still make a great living, and that's awesome. But that's the problem is they're coming to me with these preconceived notions about what Instagram wants from people who've never worked at Instagram or any tech company.
And I think that's something too. I just want to like close this conversation out because we've been talking for like an hour and a half now. I want to know. I want to be aware of your time. I think one thing like worth calling out as we move forward is that there are people giving advice that are valid and true in that context for that context. And I think that's something that like, you know, a lot of people we don't distinguish the context of the advice. When you hear someone giving you advice, me for instance, I give a lot of advice. My context is not Apple, Instagram, Facebook. I don't have a clue. I've talked to people who have worked there, but that's valid for certain types of places. And so I think that's something really important. And the other side of that is don't go and like try to call out people like Miryam here who have done it and tell them that they are doing it wrong or they are not like doing something. Cause I know you've gotten a lot of shit in the past from
Yeah,
people telling you that like, oh, you're a false prophet, or I don't know what word they use, but it's something like that. It
yeah,
was something along those lines, if I'm not mistaken, misinformation or something. And like, I just feel like it's just such a asinine thing to be like either way too, because like, again, that person's advice is fine for their context and it's their personal experience and the things they know to be true. Listen to them and follow that advice if you want to follow in their footsteps and do the work they have done.
exactly.
And that work, but that you know, and it's funny because that advice doesn't necessarily carry over because the advice you're giving, if you want to go work at like Cisco or Microsoft, or maybe Microsoft's the same way, I'm not sure. But if you want to go work at like a place like Cisco or G Aerospace where I used to work, I can tell you right now, that is a different job, a completely
Yeah,
different job. And the things you would be required to do and the skill set you need are not the same at all. So the advice is like for one and the other, it's like you try to mix them up. And I think this is something like I was guilty of this, the product designer versus UX designer debate. They're the same. Why are we making a distinction? The more I hear you and other people talk about the jobs, they are so different and they are just so foreign to
yeah.
me as someone I would consider myself a UX designer. And it's funny because I used to say product designer and like I was like, oh, I'm a product designer. And then more I hear about this, I'm just like, they're just not the same. I don't know.
Like even if you called them the same thing, like fundamentally, just it's not even a semantic thing. Like they're just very different. I think there are things in common too. Like you're still using Figma or Sketch in Apple's case. You're still using Figma, and you're still out. You're gonna be producing like mocks, you know, on the output, like when you engineer. So, and you still need to like you know, in most tech companies are working with product managers, and maybe at non-tech companies they might have product managers and product owners and whatever. But you're never gonna get like a wireframe from someone. You're never gonna get like, maybe somebody on your team might come up with an idea that isn't, and it's not yours, but you're expected to come up with the ideas, or, and maybe in Apple's case, like leadership is it's a little more top down. Some places a little more bottoms up, but overall, like designers are just the scope of work is really intense at these companies, and no one's helping you. Sorry, like that sounds really emo, but like no one's helping you, and that's why these companies, like people are like, oh my god, that no one ever hires juniors. Yeah, I know.
Because they
We
can't.
don't,
Yeah, right.
right? We just don't. Which, isn't always true. Like, there's definitely people with low years of experience even were on my team at Instagram, but they were just very skilled. And so they have the years of a junior, but they don't have the skills of a junior, I would say. Yeah, and so they have stuff in common, and I don't even care if you call them the same thing. Like, if you wanna call them, like, usually internally at the company, we don't say product designer. Like, we just say, like, "Oh, designer, PD, whatever."
Designer, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and, like, I don't know, even at Apple, you'll say something like HI designer or, like, human interaction designer, or, like, you'll just say designer or whatever. It like, sometimes people just say, like, UX, whatever, it doesn't matter. But ultimately, like, fundamentally, the job, the expectations are just, like, different. There's some things they have in common, but there's some things that are different. And that's why I think something I've noticed is, like, whenever I talk about, like, "Hey," I try not to editorialize as much as possible. Like, I'm not perfect, but I try not to editorialize. I try to just give an honest recounting of, like, every job I've had and, like, every job I've interviewed for and every job offer I've gotten, but I didn't take, and I got a really good insight into the company, or I personally am very good friends with someone there or whatever. I try to speak on exact experiences I've had. I try not to make necessarily generalized statements, although I think generalizations are useful. But I don't like to say, like, this is how you are a successful product designer. You need to do step one, step two, step three, and then iterate, whatever. It's not like that. Like, but I do notice that when I describe, like, okay, designers at these companies are pitching constantly, concepting constantly, using shit tons of intuition. You have to have good taste. And at the highest performing teams, you need to be an incredible interaction designer. And you need to be able to prototype it, which is how you become an incredible interaction designer. And the visuals have to be excellent. The standards are just very high on because of the brand, whatever. Whenever I talk about these things, I hear from people that, "Oh, you're doing design wrong," or whatever, but I notice that I don't tell them they're doing design wrong. I think that in their companies, this is the expectation that they work with, like, these specific steps, and my personal perspective is that's how they do it. They should continue to do that. If that makes them happy, if they feel like that makes their company successful, and if that's how they wanna work, I'm happy for them. But that's not how we work typically, and, it works for us. These companies are some of the richest companies in human history. I don't think it's by coincidence that I do think it works what we do. I'm happy to, like, take criticism for, like, Instagram maybe being addicted for some people. Like, I'm sure that's true, but you could technically see that as a W, evidence that it works.
It works for the company.
Right. So there's something to be said about the stickiness of the product and the success of the business and how it, maybe it doesn't promote good mental health, but there's still desire for it. There's still whatever. So there's something to be said about it. And I don't malign those designers for working the way that they do. And like, if people are like, "Oh, well, designers aren't programmers," like, okay, good luck with that attitude on iOS. Sorry. Like, I don't know what to say. Like,
Yeah,
you're writing
and
code.
that's the thing that, like, I think is just worth noting here. Like, what works for one team, and this is, UX, we don't, or software, there is no international standards. There is not like architecture where there's boards and you have to
Yeah.
do it a certain way and practice a certain way or you don't keep your license. We can do whatever we want. And to try to
Yeah.
tell one team or another how they should or shouldn't work is absolutely asinine. Like you said, what works for you? If that makes your company money and that gets your team your stuff pushed to production, then do it that way. And if
Yeah.
users are happy with it and they want to pay for it, then great. And if you don't like it, why I just when I see people online like complaining about how other people do their job, it's like, why do you care? Like, you're not getting paid to like consult and improve their processes. Like, stop. Like, I just don't, and it makes no sense to me. I really don't understand why people do that.
I feel the same. I do feel that it's fine if people have opinions and they disagree. Like, that's cool. But, like, I guess, like, I always turn it back to, like, I'm happy you like this, and, it's fine if you wanna criticize the way that we work in tech, but, like, prove that your stuff has outcomes. Like, prove it. I need more than, like, appeals to authority. I need more than, "I'm better than you because I'm older." I prefer to keep it focused on, like, what is happening and reality and specific examples rather than, "Well, I have 20 years of experience, and I'm certified by this organization." It's like, "Okay, cool, that's amazing. Like, I got a degree, and also I should have burned it. I shouldn't have got it. Sorry, I don't care." I don't know, like, what's interesting is internally at these companies, like, nobody ever talks about, like, the difference between UX and UI. 'Cause it's like I was saying, at there's, like, more dated companies, we have the UX and we have the UI, and they're different people. That's not the case. Like, you don't hire UX designers and UI designers at tech companies. You're supposed to do both, and not just that, at the highest performing teams, you're also an interaction designer, so you're prototyping to a very extensive degree. So you're doing all of these things, and you're not expected to do 50% on one and 50%. You're supposed to do 100% on one and 100% on the other, and 100% interaction. So good fucking luck, and you better do it by next week. So shut the fuck up. So that's just how it is, and I think what's important is to, like, be able to have these conversations that really make it clear to people as early as possible in their career that these distinctions matter. And if they are coming to a mentor and they're looking for help to build their career, their mentor needs to be able to advise them on these types of differences and help them build their career. That's what mentors are supposed to do. And I've worked in so many different types of industries, and I like to give this advice because people who've never worked in the tech industry think that their experience applies to the tech industry. But if you've worked in the tech industry and outside of it, you see that it's not the case. I think their hearts are in the right place, and I respect them and I appreciate it. But I think like there's a little bit of a Dunning-Kruger effect that's happening. I just think this stuff is really important to help people understand. I always get the feedback from people that I've mentored. They're like, man, no one has ever told me any of this before. No one's ever told me about the skills that I need. And that makes me really sad. And I know one of our friends in the, in our circle, Colton, who runs Kick-Ass UX, has told me he's heard the same exact thing when he gives similar advice that I give. People are always like, oh, my bootcamp didn't say this. My university didn't say this. And that's really scary to me. These people are paying a lot of money. These are hardworking people
Yeah, it's
who
not
are
cheap.
debt financing. They're taking out credit card debt, or, they're borrowing money from their parents who are like financing against their homes or whatever to pay this stuff. And I know what it's like to be fucking broke, like literally negative $55,000 with a family that like lived in shelters for like 10 years. Like I know how hard that is and like how little your life feels worth it. To be coming out of these programs not knowing that there's a difference between working at something like Cisco versus something like Instagram and the skills that are required and even how to interview, like what a whiteboarding session is, like what an app critique is. It's just so sad. Like it legit, like people have cried to me on these calls. I feel so bad. And then they're like, oh, well, I listen to like the UX subreddits or like the UX, like how I got my UX job at like Amazon on YouTube and stuff. I feel so bad for them. And they don't even realize that they're being misled. And then also some people would get mad at me when I tell them this and they would like argue with me. And I'm like, listen, man, I'm doing this for free. Like, I want to help you. Like,
I've had mentees do that on ADP list too, and I'm
like
just like, fuck you. Like, who the fuck are you? Like, all right, yeah, fine. Let's just end this call early because you're wasting my time.
I know. And I
Like,
feel
you
so
don't
bad.
agree.
Right. And it's like, it's fine if we don't agree, but like, I mean, I thought you were asking for my opinion and I'm just giving you my opinion. I'm not telling you something. I don't give a fuck. Like, this is the advice that I would give to my sister, bro. Like I'm not telling you anything that I wouldn't want to hear, And anyways, it's not like working at Accenture or Cisco or any of these places. Like, and I don't mean to pick on them, but it's just not the same.
That is why we have you on today to make those distinctions, because clearly I don't have the experience and I'm not qualified to speak to it. And that's why I want to have you on, because I find this to be incredibly fascinating, just how different the jobs that we call UX design can absolutely be. And I think it just goes to show too that, like, you know, there is no process, or there's no standard process. There's a process. There's no standard process. There is no one way that any company will or should act. There's no one set of roles and responsibilities and duties. There are many different combinations of ways that we can build software and get software shipped, and how that happens varies wildly. And if you want to get a job in tech, you've got to understand that, just like you said, and your portfolio, your cases have to speak to it. And the same goes for enterprise. If you go and try to get a job at an enterprise level company with a chat app or social media app or dog walking app, you're probably not going to get a job there either. And so I mean the same applies across the board. Like work, you've got to have work that speaks to the work that you want. And if
Exactly.
that's from past jobs, then that's great. If it's from projects that you've done yourself, personal projects or something else, side project you've done, that's great too. But it's got to speak to that company, And if you're not doing your research and understanding what those companies want, you're going to have a very hard time, regardless if it's a tech company, enterprise, wherever. You've got to know who your audience is. And anyway, I just find this like completely fascinating how different your job is. I could talk to you about this all day.
Oh, facts. Yeah, I'll let you go. Maybe can I add like one last thing? Okay. One last thing is if I were to advise someone who wants to work at Instagram or Apple or whatever, and they are either a pre-career designer or they've even been in the industry for some time and they've worked at these more traditional companies and they want to figure out how to do it. I almost want to like make myself available to mentor them, but like it's just not scalable. But my suggestion would be tech companies want to see you come up with cool ideas, like great ideas, beautifully executed. So you need to be able to be independent. So when people say, "Oh, well, my PM is the one who comes up with ideas," you're not going to be able to work at a tech company. Sorry. Like if that's what you want, sorry, you just can't. You need to be able to think independently. You have to have strong opinions about the product, and that can be you can make like a portfolio of like, let's say you work at Accenture and you've worked on mainly like simple websites or web apps or things that are not like interfaces or whatever and you want to work on Instagram stories, what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to either, I would suggest either like use Instagram and come up with like 5 features that you think Instagram should have, or really anything. Maybe you have opinions, like a couple features on LinkedIn that you want to improve, improvements to Twitter, or, not just improvements, but also new features or whatever it could be. Like, so, just come up with like things like a product that you use that you feel really passionately about and you have a lot of opinions on and go make a portfolio of just like I would, right? On Instagram. I am told like focus on this part of Instagram. Now come up with concepts and pitch me on features that you think should exist. And basically do that, but not paid by yourself. Use a product that you feel passionately about. And, I think it would be best if it was like maybe a mobile app so you can do really intense interaction work as well. Because what you want to do is when I say like beautifully executed, I also mean like, iOS is the phone has like no buttons essentially. It's all very gestural. If you're a designer on iOS, you are not going to be able to get away with just making still screens. You are the designer implementing all of these transitions. So the sooner you can get to that point where you are not just coming up with cool ideas and also implementing all the interaction work yourself, and you're able to demo that in a portfolio that you share with people. Here are the cool features I think Instagram should have. Here are 6 features I think Discord should have. And you show it, not just with mocks. And the deck looks beautiful. The faster you can do that, the faster you will get hired at these companies. It doesn't matter your years of experience. It doesn't matter anything, where you studied. None of that stuff matters. The credentials are not going to help you. If you want to work at Instagram or Notion or whatever, you need to show proof of work, not proof of credential. You need to show
Oh,
excellent
I love that.
ideas, well executed.
Excellent closing words. Miryam, this was amazing. I really had a fantastic time talking to you today. I got some questions I'd like to ask all of my guests to help all our listeners get to know our guests a little bit better. First one, what is your favorite non-design book?
So I hate reading. No, I'm kidding. I actually never read about design. I write about design. I don't read. But I really like nonfiction writing. I've gotten into things like military strategy and history. So actually, there's this one author who he passed away. Actually, oh, I guess it's been 10 years. His name is Fouad Ajami. He's like I think he's Egyptian. This book it's really excellent. It's called Crossroads: The Way of Saudi Arabia, and it's a deep dive into many important topics about policy and strategy politically within the Middle East. He's a really wonderful historian, especially of the Middle East. He also served in our military. He's a patriot, fierce patriot, and he was a wonderful man. I really recommend that book if you're curious about Middle Eastern politics, especially with a special focus on like the Syrian war as well as civil war, as well as Saudi Arabia as well, given it's such an important power in the Middle East. It's very interesting. Yeah, I like nonfiction mainly.
Right on. Yeah, I'm the same way. I'm big on history books. It's funny too because a lot of that stuff, like, did you grow up in the States? Did you grow up in Miami? I know you went to high school there, but did you go like
A couple places, but yeah, Miami's one of them. But yeah, outside as well. Yeah.
okay. Yeah, because like growing up in the States, you have like American history. You probably have like a state history of whatever state you grew up in. But like, I would say I didn't learn anything about maybe Canada, maybe Mexico, and if nothing else, it was just through like the various wars that America
Yeah.
was in or something. But I learned very little about anywhere outside the United States all through high school and elementary school and stuff. It's fascinating reading books about
Yeah.
stuff just outside of the United States. Anyway, I love reading history books about that kind of stuff. But
I'm with you. I'm with you. I feel like as an adult, I've had to play catch up to like fully understand things because like I don't know.
yeah, I've been listening to podcasts like the history of Byzantium, which is like the Eastern Roman Empire.
Wait, that is so
Yeah. Oh,
cool.
it's fascinating.
It is
The
so.
guy's got like 300 something episodes, and I've gone through like all of them, and I'm like caught up now. And he just had a kid, so like he's not posting as
Can you
many,
send
but
me that? But also, does he talk at all about like the impact of like Christianity? I assume because it's Byzantine period, like Christianity and the Christianization of Europe and stuff like that. Because my family is actually from Jesus's birth town, Bethlehem.
Bethlehem? No shit. Wow, that's crazy. That's pretty fascinating. No, no, not really. He's more like talking about because at this point, like when Byzantium became like split from the Roman Empire, it was already Christian. That was like Constantine had like, well, actually, no, it wasn't. It was the emperor after Constantine made it like officially Christian, but
Yeah, but the Byzantine Empire wasn't Roman. Oh my god.
so we have this, it's the Eastern Roman Empire, and
Oh,
actually they thought of themselves as Romans, but the historians just say Byzantine to kind of differentiate it from like the other part of Rome.
oh,
But yeah, it was like technically part
oh,
of
so you
Rome.
mean like the kind of there's two Roman empires sort of, and Byzantine is like
There was the Roman Empire, and then which one? One of the emperors split it into two basically, and then the Vandals and like the Germans like invaded and like took over basically the Western Rome. They fell in
yes.
like 300 or something.
Okay.
And then you had the other side that actually lasted till like 1400. It's crazy how long that,
I think
like
that's
1,000,
the
2,000
side.
years.
The
Crazy.
Eastern Empire would be what people refer to as Byzantium, and that's the one where everyone's like Greek Orthodox and stuff, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So that would be like Constantinople, which, Istanbul now, obviously, but like Constantinople, Turkey, and
Yeah.
the eastern half of the
Well,
Mediterranean. Yeah. Anyway, it's super fascinating stuff. But I love that kind of stuff because I've never learned anything
oh,
about that
so real.
in high school. All right. What is your favorite non-design podcast?
I also do not listen to a design podcast outside of this one. So I really like The Goodfellows by the Hoover Institution at Stanford. Neil
Okay.
Ferguson and John Cochran and H.R. McMaster. They're so wonderful. H.R.
Oh,
McMaster is a very accomplished, I think, 2-star general in our military,
general. Yeah.
and he's very accomplished. And John Cochran is a wonderful economist, and Neil Ferguson is a wonderful historian who's actually he's the husband of Ayan Hirsi Ali. If you're familiar with her work at all, she's a Yemeni
I'm
lady
not, no.
who she like served as a in the parliament, I think is what they call it in Netherlands. But then she came over here to the United States, and now she's doing think tank stuff.
I've never heard of that podcast, but I'm definitely going to check it out. If you're interested in some other podcasts, the History of Byzantium is really good. There's another one I've been really, really fascinated by is the history of the history of English, which
Okay,
is like the
I
history
love that.
of the English language.
I'm so interested.
It's fascinating. It's so fascinating. Actually, Amy Santee recommended it
Oh
to
my
me,
god,
and I've been listening to it. But it's crazy because like the English, and this is not like nothing to do with like genes or familial lines, but the language has evolved from like the Indo-European language, which was like evolved into like Persian and Indian and like, well, not Indian, but like
yeah,
Hindi and stuff,
that's
and
true. I heard
Greek
about
and
that.
English and like German and French and Latin, and anyway, it's just super fascinating. But anyway, if you're interested in another
Love it.
history
Love
podcast,
it.
kind of. But all right, what is your favorite meal?
My favorite meal. Okay, I'm not like super. I always forget to eat. But okay, so like I'll say the most like there's I feel like the most stereotypical Hispanic thing ever. Empanadas con queso, so it's like very cheesy empanadas, but like specifically like Venezuelan ones, like Venezuelan and Colombian ones. They're so fucking good. But I was also gonna say Chester Flamin' hot fries. Like I'm a hot fries girl. I'm sorry, like I'm that like there's a bunch of memes about like hot Cheetos girls, and I'm like that's me. That's me actually.
Oh man, get a little that flaming hot Cheeto. The problem with that is like you lick it off and then you
Oh my
touch your
god,
face and your
I'm so
face is
into it. I
burning
don't
and
care.
everything else.
Like you could probably find Cheeto dust in like my gaming PC's like keyboard. Like I don't even care. Like whatever.
I love it. Yeah, I love some flaming hot Cheetos, man. All right, what is your favorite vacation spot?
Oh my god, I haven't taken a vacation in like I don't think in my entire like professional career, so I don't even know.
All that freaking money you make in like Silicon
No,
Valley, you're not
I don't.
taking vacations. They
I
don't
need
let you take
help. I need
vacations.
help. I need an intervention. I don't think I've ever taken a vacation.
What's the point of making all that money if you can't
Oh my
spend
god,
it?
I'm like psychopathic about like money. Like I just want to retire ASAP. I don't know. I don't know. That one is difficult. Um, I don't know. I guess I don't even like traveling, honestly.
Is it the Instagram break room? Would be your favorite vacation spot?
My bed. That's my favorite vacation spot.
All right, we'll take a pass. All right, what is your favorite design tool that's not Figma?
Origami.
Origami. Oh, I've never actually used that one. That's cool. That's the one that's like
For
for
creating.
creating like all the interactions and stuff.
It's
Yeah,
hard to
yeah, yeah.
use
I've never really
because
used Origami.
like it's there's so many things about it, and like I'm not hating on it. Like I'm not because I really appreciate the people who work on it, and it's made by Meta, and they do so much work on it, and I really appreciate them. And it's like it's a good tool, but it is very hard to use, and there's I think a lot of understand like recognized problems with it. But I do think it's worth it. There's also an internal tool at Apple. I don't know if I can disclose its name, so I won't. But it's very similar to Origami, except it's Origami. Like I mentioned, has like these patches that you can use to do like their JavaScript functions, essentially represented as patches, and you pass in outputs and like inputs, and it outputs signals, and you do stuff with it.
Oh, wow.
But in the one that's at Apple, it's like an internal tool, which I guess I won't disclose the name. It works very similarly, except you're writing the JavaScript yourself. But it is very difficult to use. Both of them are. But I would say the internal thingy is even harder.
So, Miryam, it's been amazing talking to you today. I love this topic. I just find this so fascinating. And I think more people need to hear the fact that like these two things are very different. And if you want to do one, you can't apply the principles from the other. So thanks so much for coming on. It's been fantastic. I would say, where can people find you? But since you're anonymous, nobody will know.
Yeah.
This is a mystery. It's going to be a mystery. The people who know,
If you
will
know, you know. But I feel like if people are dedicated enough, like, I mean, I almost want to say, like, if they're dedicated enough, like, maybe I feel like they could find out who I am. But I will say that, like, you know, maybe if they want to reach out to you, I don't know. I don't want to make you like the middleman or something, but
you reach out to me, we'll pass it on to Miryam here. And if she thinks you're worthy, if she thinks you're good enough for her, we'll pass your connection on.
Just don't be mad at me. And we're cool.
As long as you promise not to yell at her, we'll pass your information on. All right. Thanks again for coming on. This was amazing. This was a really great conversation. And anybody out there who's curious about this stuff, hit me up, because seriously, it's just such a fascinating thing. And I just feel like there's so much misinformation around this stuff. So I'm happy to spread the good news, as they say.
And thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity to share my perspective that is maybe unconventional for many. I realize it's different for those maybe outside of tech, and I'm always excited to chat about it. I'm really appreciative also to be on this podcast with like all your guests who are very hardworking and talented people. So I'm very grateful to be given this opportunity.
Hell yeah, right on. Well, happy to have you. Well, all right, y'all. That's it from me and Miryam for today. I hope we helped to shed a little bit of light on what product design at a big fancy FAANG company is like and what it takes to get a job there. But have you been struggling with landing a job at a big tech company, or were you able to figure it out like Miryam did and get your foot in the door? And if you did, was the culture what you expected, or was it not at all what you expected? What'd you think? Let me know what you think on LinkedIn, or shoot me an email at hello@beyonduxdesign.com. I'd love to hear from you. If you like what you heard today, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would love it if you left a 5-star review. That'll help me out so much more than you can imagine. And if you know somebody who might find any of this stuff useful, then why don't you tell them about it? That would be fantastic. One more shout out to Chris for leaving fantastic feedback for the Beyond UX Design book. Don't forget, if you pick up the book from beyonduxdesign.com/book and you leave some honest feedback, you'll get a chance to win a shout out on the show, a badass holographic Beyond UX Design sticker, a free book, or even a chance to have a one-on-one with me. So head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/book and use the promo code LISTENER to get 10% off your copy today. Help keep the show independent and ad-free. Check out beyonduxdesign.com/support to find out how. You can join Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, and many others, and help keep the show independent and ad-free. You'll get rough transcripts and exclusive access to the entire video library of episodes, and even episodes before they're released. And you can get instant access to the video archives for as little as $5 a month. And if you're looking for a UX course that's as unique as you are, do yourself a favor and check out Mento Design Academy. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/Mento and use the promo code BeyondUX200 for $200 off the course. So join Mento and let your passions lead your learning journey. Remember to sign up for the newsletter. Check out all the past episodes along with all the show notes at beyonduxdesign.com. I hope you keep coming back for more great UX tips from Beyond UX Design. And until next time, remember, you're more than a designer, because there's more to UX and design. I'll see you around. Take care, y'all.
It's Miryam.
Miryam.
But,
okay. Miryam.
Yeah.
All right. I'm gonna write that down. Miryam.
Yeah.
All right. You can correct me if I screw it up.
Miryam. Yeah.
I got this like New Orleans Yat accent.
Yeah.
So that's how I pronounce Yatty instead of Yachty.